Good afternoon, everybody. You are here for Navigating the Reentry Landscape, and our presenter today is Brandon Warren. Today's September 23rd. My name is Olga Escamilla, and I also have my colleagues Elizabeth Moya and Anne-Marie Molinari that they will be helping me. So please join me in welcoming Brandon Warren to Workforce Wednesday. So Brandon, as an incarcerated student, Brandon Warren earned an Associate of Arts in Humanities from the Lee College Huntsville Center in 2004. Upon release, he finished a bachelor and master's degree and is currently working on a doctorate of education at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. For the last 8 years, Brandon has worked full-time for 2 college programs inside the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He works for Lee College as a full-time transition specialist, helping the formerly incarcerated Lee College alumni transition into society. He is also an adjunct professor of courses in philosophy, theology, and academic skills between Lee College in Huntsville and Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary on the Darrington unit south of Houston. So welcome, Brandon, and take it away.
Thank you, Olga. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, thank you all for having me. So I'm excited to talk about what we've been doing here at Lee College in terms of reentry. So Olga mentioned several things about my background. So I am formerly incarcerated, went several different times. Let me just put that there. Started off as a teenager, ended up incarcerated on 3 separate occasions. That totaled about 6.5 years between the ages of 16 and 24. And while I was there the 3rd time, from 19 to 24 years old, I had the opportunity to enroll in a college program, which was being offered by Lee College Huntsville Center. So I did construction carpentry, I did horticulture, I did air conditioning, refrigeration, and I finished with 128 hours with an Associate of Humanities. I've been out 16 years now. And I finished a bachelor's in biblical counseling at the College of Biblical Studies. It's in Houston. And then I did a Master of Divinity, and so theology at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, the Houston campus. And I'm finishing a 2nd master's degree right now in philosophy, while also doing a doctorate of education at the University of St. Thomas. So I've had the opportunity to work inside the prison system now for 10 years, actually. First, it was with Southwestern Baptist Seminary's undergraduate program on the Darrington unit. They have a really unique program that they hired me to help them establish, whereby they look for people with long-term sentences, so life sentences, capital life, consecutive life sentences, to give them the opportunity to get a bachelor's degree in biblical studies. It's fully accredited, regionally accredited, but free of charge. The idea there being not so much about reducing recidivism as it is about culture change within the prison itself. And so these men and the women will have an opportunity to do this in a couple of years. Will get a bachelor's degree, and then they're sent out in teams to other maximum security prisons across the state of Texas to serve as what they call field ministers. So they're able to do things like tutor people in GED, ESL, literacy, do chaplaincy services. They're also able to sit with people who are on suicide watch and do lay counseling. So it's a really innovative, unique program. So I helped with that for the first 6.5 years. But for the last 3 years now, I've been with Lee College, the college that I had the opportunity to take college courses from while I was incarcerated. And so I have been working full-time now as a transition specialist, which is in correctional setting is to focus on reentry, and then doing adjunct work in different courses that they offer in philosophy and learning strategies. So when it comes to reentry, before my role in 2017, the colleges were not allowed to have any sort of regular communication or contact with people who are coming out of prison. It was seen as establishing an inappropriate relationship. There was always communication for sort of minor things like maybe transcripts and transfer information, but there was no concerted effort to have any real relationships with alumni upon release. And that wasn't because the colleges didn't want to, that's just because they were told they could not have that sort of a relationship. But that changed a few years ago in 2017. And so I began trying to develop a reentry program for Lee College with really no model, no template. I didn't step into a sort of template on how this was supposed to work. So I began connecting with nonprofit organizations, ministry organizations, government agencies at the local and state level to find out how they were serving people who were coming out of prison. And then I have my own experience, obviously, from making that transition and all the sort of things that I had to go through and occasionally still have to go through even now, even though my conviction was 20 years ago and I've been out for 15 years. I still sometimes feel the what they call the collateral consequences of those choices when I was a teenager. So I've been here for 3 years now developing this program. And so I wanted to talk to you a little about what it is that I do. So I've got three main sections to this conversation. The first one is just explaining to you what we do here at Lee College for reentry. The second one is what I think you should know about reentry. And this is not to say that you don't already know quite a bit. It's just from my perspective, some of the things that I try to share with people who are trying to get a good understanding of what's going on in reentry. And then the last one is what needs to be done about this. And in that section, I have a perspective that I haven't really seen emphasized in other programs. And I'll explain it then. So first, what are we doing here at Lee College? Well, I've got this crazy looking chart that I don't mean to scare anyone. And the colors, I didn't make the colors up when I changed the design. That's what came out. So sorry if it's abrasive for the colors. But I'm going to walk through these sections independently. But just looking at the chart overall, there are two major sections. The one there in purple says alumni services. And by alumni, I just mean any student who was enrolled in Lee College while they were incarcerated. I don't mean that these are necessarily graduates because they may not have graduated for any number of reasons, but I'm still considering them alumni. And so there are quite a few things that I do for them, which is what people would consider reentry proper. But then also I have the student services side because there are a lot of things that need to be done, in my opinion, before a person is released to get them prepared for just all of the crazy things they're going to encounter in reentry. And I'm naturally inclined as a teacher to think in that manner, what can I do to prepare them for what they're going to encounter, as opposed to wait until they're out and, try to serve them with various resources. But then in the middle there, you see a section that says research. Because the research overlaps with both sides. There are things that I research pretty much on a daily basis. And then as I've been here and as I've learned a little bit more in my own education, I've tried to do more to be precise and efficient in data collection and analysis to help us get a better idea of our effect on individual students. So the first one there is on the alumni services. So the first major section there is networking. Lee College has graduated over 10,000 individuals. We've given out over 15,000 degrees and certificates, but some people got more than one. But over 10,000 people just in the last 25 to 26 years. But Lee College has been in the system since 1965. But because of the rules, not being allowed to have any sort of significant relationship or communication with former students, we didn't know where any of them were. We didn't know what happened to them. So when I started the job, I just asked everybody who was involved if they had any sort of contact information with former students. And there were a few, like myself. I had been in touch for various reasons over the years. And we started off with a list of about 40. So now it's grown to over 350, but that's still just a small percentage of all of our former students who are out there. So one of the things I do is just create a network for the students. I've also started a mentor program so that our students who have been successful in any given industry, so for example, trucking or HVAC or welding, they've volunteered to serve as mentors. And what I mean by mentors is simply their willingness to answer emails or have a phone conversation with another student, another person who's been released, to give them advice on the given industry. It's not about hanging out or anything like that, and it's not about getting people jobs per se. But if somebody comes out and they're a welder and they're in San Antonio trying to understand what's going on in the welding industry in the San Antonio area, then I will connect them with somebody who's already doing really well in welding, and this person can help them understand things that they need to know much better than I can because they're right in the middle of that industry. So we also started a website last year. This is one of the unique things I think we can do a lot more, and I would suggest other organizations attempt to do something similar. The website we're using is hosted by a company that hosts alumni platforms. So for example, Texas Christian University, Oxford University, Rutgers, they all have alumni platforms which function like social media sites like Facebook or LinkedIn, but exclusively for alumni. So my supervisor got the idea that we should just use that since we are in fact serving our alumni, but use that as a way to affect reentry issues. So we started that about a year ago, and here's what it looks like. So here's our website. A student will fill out information, but not just a student. I have it also where employers, recruiters, reentry professionals can also become a part of the website. They sign up, fill out some questions. I approve them once I verify that they're students, and then they have access to just a number of things. Too many for me to go on about in this presentation, but you see it just looks like any other sort of social media site where I can post information, updates and news. It's got a directory that actually lists their jobs, which can serve as a useful felony-friendly list, because if someone has hired former students, then presumably you would assume they were a felony-friendly company. But I also have things like felony-friendly jobs lists that I've compiled over the years in various ways that they have access to. Okay, so I've also created different groups for our students by region and by industry. So for our students who are in automotive technology, they can join that group and talk to each other just about what's going on in that industry. For people who are in Austin, they can get together and talk about what's going on in Austin. There's a lot of things going on in the website, and I found it to be helpful. It's just a matter of getting someone who can really spend a lot of time marketing and making use of it, because at this point, I'm not able to do that just as one person. Let me go back to this.
Now, Brandon, while you're going back, we had a question from Veronica Moore. She's with TWC, and she said, can we get a link to this site?
Yes. Yeah. The one I just showed you, it's lchcalumni.com, lchcalumni.com. It will just let you see the front page. It won't let you in unless you sign up. If you sign up, note that you are a reentry professional, and I'll approve you so you can get in, but you can just see the front page if you go to lchcalumni.com. That's the networking component. There's several things going on with the networking, but it's helpful for the students to be able to see what other people are doing and how they're managing things in different areas.
So Brandon,
yes.
There's another question based on the
Okay.
website. So
Sure.
will you work with anyone that was recently released but was not part of Lee College?
Well, right now, it really depends because I'm stretched pretty thin just with our Lee College students. And so when families have contacted me, it just depends on what they're asking. If it's something that's going to take quite a bit of time, then I'm not able to do it. But if it's just a quick reference to, some website that would be helpful, I do. But just because I'm kind of stretched thin just with Lee College in general, they're the ones that I focus on.
Thank you.
For reentry assistance, I just do what you would imagine in terms of reentry assistance, trying to help people find felony-friendly jobs, helping them make the transition into the university or to finish their education if they didn't complete it before they got out, trying to find housing that's felony-friendly. So anything that you can imagine having to do with the reentry issues, I also help with there. Research, I'll just talk about quickly. I also answer mail. And so the students can ask me for help in any way that will help them with reentry. So it could be needing an address in El Paso on where they can get their ID or social security card, something like that. Or it could be, halfway houses in Dallas, Fort Worth. Anything having to do with reentry I can help them with. So I do quite a bit of research because that's what I end up doing, is serving as their research assistant to find this information. And I've created several different surveys to get a snapshot of what our students actually or see themselves needing before they get out versus what they actually need when they do get out. And there's quite a few things I've done in terms of surveys to understand assessing their needs in an accurate way. Try to do some employment stats, some recidivism stats. The recidivism stats for us currently sit between 8.6% and 13%. It's a longer story as to how we know that, but at this point, we've got some pretty stellar recidivism stats when compared to other statistics that you might see across the state or nation. And then in terms of student services, I do the correspondence. I also do classroom presentations. So I go into all of the vocational classrooms, give them a survey assessing their reentry needs, and then explain to them who I am, what I do, answer questions, and do a little bit of myth busting to explain what's true about all of the things they may have heard about what they can get when they get out. I also developed a reentry course, which I modify from 5 weeks to 12 weeks, just depending on the need. But at best, it's a 12-week course that I treat like an academic course once a week for 3 hours a week. It's not for credit. We don't charge them. It's just something that we do for them to help them if they are close to going home. And then I've created a bunch of resources. So here are pictures of a couple of them. I've created a pamphlet on reentry resources across the state. It's an envelope-sized pamphlet that I can put easily into an envelope. One that we just got printed last week. Some of you, if you've been working in reentry, you may have heard of a letter of instructions for released inmates. If you've worked for TWC or DARS or anything like that, there's a letter that circulates the prison which says, when you get out, you can go to the Social Security office, you can get all kinds of money. If you just show them your parole papers, you can go to the welfare, you can go to all these places and get money and benefits. And if you add up the dollar amount to that letter, it's something like $4,000. Supposedly just for being released from prison, you can get thousands of dollars. So I took the letter and I just made a pamphlet where I do the myth busting. I just take the claim, what it says, and then I give them the truth as best I know it so that they have more accurate information and realistic expectations. And then I created a reentry plan, which we just got printed last week. So it goes over, if you see here, all the things that you might imagine: documentation, identification, transportation, housing, jobs, finances. And this is what I use in the reentry course. Each week, we discuss some of these issues at length. And sometimes I'll have guest speakers. And then travel, I'll just run through that. I go to second chance job fairs as often as I can. We do employer site visits. We'll have employers come in and visit the prison and see our classes just to help them understand what's going on. Any other questions?
So you mentioned the resources. Do you have the resources on the alumni page, or where do you have that housed in terms of all the resources that you've collected?
Yes, so on the page, if I can get to it really quickly. On the page, are you able to see it there?
Yes.
Okay, so for example, I have here, can you see felony-friendly jobs? If they click on that, it'll lead them to a spreadsheet that I created with all those resources. But then also here, it's got a link to Career One Stop, which is just a Department of Labor website that helps with job searches and resumes. The Texas State Law Library has a lot of resources for reentry, especially restrictions in the workforce with people with felonies, particular to the industry. The Criminal Justice Coalition, Work in Texas. So on the website, they have access to quite a few different resources relative to reentry. All right.
Okay, Brandon, if you want to continue.
Sure. So here's what you should know. And many of you may have been working in reentry related matters for a while. So some of this you already know, but here's what I try to explain to people who are just getting into reentry is that it's what I call the shifting landscape of reentry. So first is that the criminal justice system is not a coherent, singular system. you have a web of resources at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. And trying to keep up with all of the policies, laws, programs, that are going on in all of these different areas is pretty impossible. So for example, with TWC, one of the managers at the Workforce Solutions, she told me, she would go to these regular meetings where they would update them on all the new programs and policies. Well, I'm not a part of TWC or Workforce Solutions, so you can imagine me trying to keep up with the latest policies and programs and what's available in organizations all across the state and the country. It's kind of crazy, but it changes quite often, especially now in light of COVID, for example. When we had the CARE Act, people with felonies were not able to get the small business loans. I don't know if they changed that, but the immediate response in the immediate care package, they weren't able to get loans for their small businesses. And we have some students of ours who have small businesses. So these things, they just change with the environment, and it's really hard to keep up with them. Most of the things that you see being covered by the media have to do with federal issues. Like many of you have heard of, like the Second Chance Act or the First Step Act that was signed a year and a half ago. But the federal criminal justice system is only dealing with about 10% of the incarcerated population. And so for our context, for people in Texas, we should really just focus on state level, but even more so than that, focusing on local level programs and policies. It's important to understand that these things are changing all the time, and it's really difficult to keep up with them because of what I'm going to suggest should be done about that on behalf of the people who are coming out of prison. But just briefly, so at the federal level, you have the Second Chance Act in 2008. And from my perspective, reentry becomes a buzzword at that point. Obviously, there have been people who have been working in reentry. They may not have called it that, but reentry then becomes a buzzword from 2008 on, and government institutions, nonprofits, and ministries start to flourish who are trying to work on those things specifically, getting grants at the federal level for innovative projects that they're doing. And just a few things, for example, under Obama's administration, he started the Fair Chance Business Pledge, where he encouraged businesses to change their policies or alter their policies such that they would be more willing to allow people with felony convictions to work for them. And so when he did that, since then, over 100 of organizations have joined the pledge. You see a lot of them are universities and colleges. They were the first to jump on board with the idea. But there are also some bigger places like American Airlines, Google, Xerox, Microsoft, Ford, Toyota, some of the automobile manufacturing. There's quite a few. And this sort of spiraled into smaller businesses who are willing to change their policies. But a lot of times students will want a felony-friendly employer list. And outside of this list that you all are looking at right now, it's really difficult to get any reliable, up-to-date felony-friendly list because they change so often. New management changes, they no longer accept felons. It's a whole discussion in and of itself. But this was something that was a part of, at the federal level, moving towards helping people with felony convictions. He also did the Fair Chance Housing Act, which changed some of the strict stipulations for people with felonies and drug felonies from getting into government housing. It just made it a little bit more difficult for people to deny people on the basis of felonies. They still can, but it's a little bit more difficult. They can't just do it solely on the basis of their felony. So these things began to make some important changes at the federal level and for people with federal crimes. At the state level, the Texas Workforce Commission, obviously, and the Workforce Solutions offices, but even these can be very hard to keep up with. I mentioned the example of someone here in Huntsville who was going to, regular meetings as a manager there at the office, trying to keep up with all the different policies and programs. But so you'll have uniform programs offered at the Workforce Solutions offices across the state, but then you might have some programs that are unique to that region because it's broken up into 28 regions. You might have some things that are unique to that region that may not be available in some other region. That's important for me to know because our students can go all over the state of Texas. And so something that's available in the Brazos Valley may not be available in Houston or may not be available in the Panhandle. So understanding more at the local level in terms of workforce solutions is important to know what resources are available. And they've done things like, provide money for equipment and clothing, but the criteria for eligibility, changes. And so it's always important to try and keep up with the local level with what's going on. TDCJ's Reentry and Integration Division is also good at the state level. Everything that they're doing, I consider to be innovative and great theoretically, and they have hundreds of people who are involved. But from my experience, it's really hard to get the communication to travel to the reentry case managers who are dealing with individuals on the ground. For example, the reentry division is supposed to help people get their documentation, their birth certificate, social security card, and a state ID before they're released. But this doesn't always happen for quite a few reasons. For example, if they were adopted or they had an alias or they had a typo in their name that they never corrected. There's just so many reasons why that doesn't work. It's everything that they're doing is great. It's just if we could get it to be more consistent, that would be helpful. And then I have here Second Chance Victories in the Legislature. This is put together by the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, a nonprofit organization based in Austin who actually has some formerly incarcerated people like Doug Smith doing policy analysis and working on legislation for everything imaginable concerning criminal justice. And so at that link there, you can find just a bunch of different things that have changed over the years at the state level in terms of laws. And then there's local systems. And this is where it gets even more complicated because, for example, there are a number of entities in the large urban areas that are working together to try and help people coming out of prison. For example, in Houston, as opposed to somewhere like Tarrant County, Bexar County, or Travis County, who have large organizations that are working in unison together to try and help people coming out. In Houston, it's disparate entities trying to help. So I've been to places where we had representatives from churches and law and legal offices and TDCJ all trying to work out ways to make things more efficient in Houston. And then the next month I'll go to a similar conference and none of the people at that conference were at the previous conference, but everybody's trying to do the same thing. So it's really difficult to keep up with all the organizations that are out there trying to do reentry, and they all have their own eligibility criteria. And these things fluctuate as well. So I labeled a few just sort of noteworthy ones in the different major counties, but there are quite a few at the local level. So there's a reason that I wanted to point out how complex these things are, because it leads into the last point. But up until this point, is there any questions?
Okay, now's your chance. We have Brandon here. He's got a wealth of information. Do you have a partnership with other colleges in the Houston area, like U of H or HCC or Lone Star?
So we have, the Baytown, our main campus in Baytown, Lee College has like articulation agreements worked out with University of Houston downtown. And I have started that process. It hasn't really gone very far, but I've begun the process. But that's the only one where we've officially made a connection. Now we are in relationship with places like San Jac, Alvin Community College, University of Houston, Clear Lake, because not San Jac, but the others also have prison programs. So in that sense, we are connected, but nothing formal except with University of Houston downtown. And I've tried to make agreements with online universities, for example, Arkansas State University, Adams State University, and quite a few others, that our students could make the transition from their associate's degree here and move into an online Bachelor of Applied Science elsewhere. So none of those have been formalized. They're all in the process of working those out.
Right, thank you. So Brandon, you're saying that you're doing, as in your role, you're doing all of this work for Lee College to make that connection, right?
Yes, at this point it's just me.
Okay. And so Shirley says the Dallas County link says it's not a secure link. Oh.
Yeah, a couple of those did that to me earlier. When I added them into the presentation, I went to the site and just copy and pasted it. I'm not sure why that is. I can figure out a different link, but that just started happening today for some reason. But all of the entities there are active and and legitimate entities that I don't know what's going on with them.
If they kind of look up the
They can
Tarrant
find
County
it.
Reentry Coalition, they could find
Yeah,
that.
Reentry One Stop. If you type in Reentry One Stop Reentry Coalition, you'll find it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I wanted to just say a couple of quick stories about to add to the how things work. So one of our students got out. He had his CDL. He got a CDL with us and was released to the Southeast Houston area. So he's ready to go to work with his CDL, but he's one of these who didn't get all of his documentation before he was released. He didn't get a social security card. And so the way it should work is that he would contact the reentry case manager for his location, and they can help fill in those gaps in terms of helping them with their documentation. But he was at what's called a satellite office. So there was no reentry case manager actually stationed there at the office permanently. They only came to visit like once a month. His parole officer didn't tell him all of this. I figured it out by doing some of my own research. And he also didn't have a car or transportation. So one of the trucking companies that we worked out a partnership with was on the northwest side of Houston, so like 30 miles away from where he was at. And he didn't have any transportation to get over there to do things like a job interview. This is before everything was online in terms of COVID. So that's one example of the sort of complexity, right? He got his state ID, but he wasn't able to get social security card. And then the appropriate channels he should have gone through, he didn't know about. And then when we figured those out, it turned out his specific location only had a person helping once a month, and he didn't have transportation. So he's walking up and down the street doing things like that. So we never really know what sort of variables they're going to be lacking or be strained in trying to get on their feet, even though they may have done everything they could while they're in prison. Another example was someone who finished his degree and had a place to go, had reliable transportation, and had a job. He had all three of those lined up through us because where he was going to stay was a parole approved place to stay. That place actually provided the transportation, and we worked out a partnership with the employer, which was just down the street, and he already had the job. But parole, for whatever reason, didn't agree with that plan and sent him to Lufkin, where there's nothing in terms of resources. So he's doing fine now, but it was just one of those situations where you think you've got everything lined up and worked out. This is going to work great. This is going to be sort of a showcase of how things can work. And then something you didn't even anticipate stepped in and altered that. All sorts of stories like that where you never know what's going to go on. Someone was locked up for 30 years. He was not born here, but he was a citizen. But that was one of the reasons he couldn't get any of his identification and documentation before he got out. And his parole officer apparently didn't know how to help him. So we connected him with Lee College. We have someone at Lee College who deals with immigration and documentation, and they helped him get all of that paperwork. So you never really know what's going to happen. Someone might have the job in the place, but no transportation. They might have transportation, but not a place to stay. It's really complex. And so because of all of that, because of the way policies and criteria change so often, and because of the variables that need to be in play for everyone, the suggestions that I have for others is that we need to do what we can to prepare them for release, before they get out. It's one thing for us to have the resource lists, like I've helped create, or you can go find felony friendly employers and you can give a person addresses and phone numbers and emails and contacts, but you never know how legitimate or reliable those things are because time has passed. And they can get very frustrated, as you can imagine, coming out with a felony and having all these things against them, not knowing what to do. And so although I've created quite a few resources and I try to connect them with the right people and the right contact information, one of the things that I focus on really in the reentry course and others is to help them develop the appropriate mindset internally, talk about strategies in navigating reentry, or what is sometimes referred to as the development of soft skills. Usually when I say soft skills, everyone recognizes vaguely what a soft skill is, but helping understand what those are, cultivating and developing those before release will help them in a number of ways. And I say that because I have, an interest in teaching. And so in the course, we talk a lot about that. So I just had one slide up here which talked about, from a research perspective, the importance of soft skills. In the article, they call it non-cognitive qualities. But when we talk about soft skills, we're talking about things like listening, communication, leadership, but it's so much more than the basics that, like leadership and listening and communication and speaking and whatnot. It includes things like humility, open-mindedness. You may have heard of grit, growth mindset, resilience. All of these qualities are important. They're measurable. They have predictive value just as much as SAT scores, GPA scores, and IQ scores. But they're a huge part of what's missing in the reentry preparation and education inside the system. So the slide I have up there just goes over some of the benefits of the development of non-cognitive qualities, otherwise known as soft skills, done by the Hamilton Project, which is a part of the Brookings Institution. They say the U.S. economy is demanding more non-cognitive skills. There are strong labor market payoffs to both cognitive and non-cognitive skills. The labor market increasingly rewards those non-cognitive skills. Those in the bottom quartile of non-cognitive skills are only about a third as likely to complete a college education as those in the top quartile. Non-cognitive skill development interventions improve student achievement and reduce behavioral problems. And it's important for its predictive value in terms of success upon release, but it can be developed through intervention and help with their academic achievement and reduction in behavioral issues. And then the last two were that preschool intervention showed quite a bit of success, and a teacher's ability to improve these non-cognitive skills actually have more of an effect on graduation rates than the teacher's ability to help them raise their test scores. In other words, teaching for the test is not as helpful in terms of graduation and success as teaching people in the area of soft skills. So I know this one kind of comes out of left field for a lot of people, because what they're really just looking for is websites and phone numbers and people to talk to, but spending time to help develop their character so that they're ready for all the drama that they're going to encounter when they get out. Because especially if they're in a situation where they're living in a halfway house with no transportation, no job, it's going to be very demanding and very frustrating. And helping them develop some of these qualities like resilience to bounce back from trauma, or grit to continue to persevere in the face of all this complexity is what I think is really important. In addition to the minor area of helping them with, their material needs like transportation.
So before you go on, there's a comment, are there other reentry specialists such as you for other colleges that provide services in Texas prisons? It's my understanding that there are about 14 colleges that provide services within TDJC facilities. Your position is valuable for transitioning individuals. Is there any collaborative efforts for all of these colleges to have reentry specialists at their student institutions, transition?
The short answer is no. So the 14 colleges, that fluctuates between 10 and 14 on the years people come in and out. But because of the fact that historically the colleges were not allowed to have this sort of relationship, they just weren't putting that was not a part of their budget, wasn't a part of their strategic plan. So it's only been since 2017 when RPD, or the Rehabilitation Programs Division, allowed and encouraged this sort of thing to happen. So Alvin Community College is working on something right now. The University of Houston Clear Lake is working on something, or they've expressed interest in working on something. I've been in touch with both of those schools. Texas A&M, in a roundabout way, got in touch with some people from New Jersey. And so there are other colleges who are trying to develop it, but at the moment, we're the only ones with a college and prison program that has a reentry component.
Okay, and then there's a comment, I agree with the importance of assisting with reentry and transition services prior to release. And then one more question. In designing a reentry course, what are some things we don't need to teach? For example, it took me 2 years to realize that I didn't need to focus on study skills for internationally trained immigrants in the same way I taught it to students who didn't have this background.
Yeah, but yeah. So some of the reentry stuff, like I said, it really focuses on pointing them in the direction of resources, which can change over time relatively quickly. So, for example, spending a lot of time on getting a reduction in, for example, I have a letter right here. A guy was trying to get his surcharges removed for his traffic tickets. Well, last year that was removed on its own. If I had spent a lot of time discussing some of the really detailed issues of the legal process, some of that might be irrelevant. So focusing on things that are likely to change, I guess, whether that's legal issues, policies, felony friendly employers, for example, I think Kroger or what was it, HEB was one, and now they're not. So spending a lot of time focusing on particular resources may not be as important as just teaching them how to find what they need in any given area. And in that light, it's also, I would say, important to do more than just assert to students that they should be good listeners or good leaders or good communicators, right? All these soft skills. Just telling them you should be open-minded because it's really beneficial to your future place of business. More than just assert that they should develop these things, show them how to do that. Provide them the opportunity to do that. Like I said, this really kind of comes out of left field when I'm talking to people because this is not normal, but I really do think spending a lot of time helping people develop a certain mindset and to help them strategize is going to be much more beneficial. In other words, it's like, giving a man a fish as opposed to teaching me how to fish. That's essentially the sort of analogy that I use. Rather than me just handing him or pointing him in the right direction, I help him understand how he's going to navigate the landscape of reentry. So with that, the last thing were some important resources that I've found at the federal level. The Council of State Governments Justice Center has a reentry site that is here. So they keep up with a lot of the federal policies. So you can find information here on the First Step Act. You can find information here on Second Chance Act grants for different institutions. The call for proposals would be here. It will keep up with laws in different states. It will keep up with collateral consequences in different states. So there are a number of federal websites you could look at, but this is one that I have found helpful. The Council of State Governments Justice Center. At the state level for Texas, this criminal justice coalition I have found very helpful because when someone asks me, for example, for housing services, I can just click on housing services and put in, for example, where's Bexar County for San Antonio, and it's going to generate a list of housing services in Bexar County with the address and a brief description of that halfway house. And so this is what I send people who are still incarcerated and, I have them write these different places. You can see all the different options that you have here. The urban areas are reliable, but some of the rural areas, TCJC hasn't always kept up with updating reliable services, but the rural areas do. If you don't click on one of these and you just put Bexar County, it's going to just give you everything here. So this is good for people on the inside and the outside. TDCJ's Reentry and Integration Division, they also have a PDF of the resources, and they update that pretty regularly. And at the end of the document, if you go all the way to the end of the document, they have a bunch of houses where they will tell you whether or not the house accepts people with sex offenses. That's always important because people with sex offenses have it the most difficult time. But they have a PDF that lists all the resources in all the different counties across the state. And then they have a few other things that you can check out also, but really that resource guide is the most important. And then and on the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, in addition to the resource area that I showed you, they also have places where you can go and find out about policy work. Can you see this changing right now?
Yes. So you're going to the site, to the menu, and clicking
Yes.
on.
Mm-hmm. So they have a page, for example, on parole and reentry that will just tell you some of the latest issues going on. So, for example, occupational licensing is a big question for those of us who are in education, whether or not our students are able to get jobs in areas in which we've educated them. Douglas Smith actually put together a policy brief that explains what people with felonies need to do, how they need to address that very issue. So their website is very helpful at the state level. And Career One Stop is another one. You can use to find jobs. You can use something like Indeed or Monster, but Career One Stop is another one that has more than just the job search. I also suggest to them that they do things like take the career interest assessment, look at the resume tutorials that can help them locate apprenticeship work. So Career One Stop is a pretty comprehensive site. I mostly use it for job searches, and it can also give you like an occupational profile to help someone if they're trying to decide, what educational path they want to pursue. You can look up occupational profiles in different industries. I found that to be really helpful as well. So the big thing now I just wanted to stress is there are a lot of resources we can use, but it's very difficult to keep up with what's reliable and what's up to date. And so helping prepare the students in terms of their mindset and their dispositions for getting out and encountering this sort of bewildering landscape of resources is really important. Any questions?
Okay, so thank you, Brandon. If you have any questions about any information that Brandon's covered, or maybe some questions about his colorful chart that might have slipped, that you didn't have an opportunity to ask, please. So Brandon, you showed us a picture of the booklet that you just had printed.
Yes. This one?
Yes. So this is you created this.
Yes.
This is kind of like your reentry plan for your students.
Yes.
Okay. I think this is really good because you kind of show on the table of contents the different things that you provide information on. So we have a question. Do you have any reliable resources for people experiencing homelessness? Omar, are you talking about reentry individuals that are experiencing homelessness, or in general homelessness? Both.
So, yeah, just so it depends on where they're at. So, for example, in Houston, Beacon Law primarily focuses on people in the state of homelessness, but because there are so many people with felony convictions who end up homeless, they also focus on people coming out of prison. But the Beacon Law firm in Houston, I think they're also in a couple of other places. I just know them dominantly associated with Houston, that help with homelessness issues, legal issues. I mean, in terms of housing, that just depends on where you're at.
Anne Marie says, how about Goodwill? Oh, sorry, Anne Marie. How about Goodwill? Do you see Goodwill helping in individuals based on, for reentry, the reentry aspect of it? I know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The short answer is yes. So when I was first released from prison, I worked at a place called Katy Christian Ministries, which functions like a Goodwill. It was a resale shop, and then the proceeds went to a domestic abuse center. And so Goodwill is well known for hiring people with felonies, and then in different areas, they can do trainings and help them move on elsewhere. In San Antonio in particular, one of the Goodwill offices, who was the only one, at least what they told me, was the only one in the state that were doing this, where they helped people get licenses, IDs, documentation, in addition to job skills and training and things like that. But yeah, Goodwill is well known for what they do to help people. It's just that the only sort of negative there is that, from what I know, the jobs that they hire people for or help people get into are, minimum wage, low wage sort of jobs. But in terms of helping with material resources like provision of clothing and documentation, yeah, I would suggest those. And I would suggest not only them, because they're massive, but the urban areas have local ministries like that. So in Houston, there's Northwest Assistance Ministries. These are Christian based. You don't have to be a Christian to go to them and receive services. So that's another thing that I would suggest is, in addition to places like Goodwill and Salvation Army, any of these larger ministries that are based on resale thrift shops, they're funding some other mission, and people coming out of prison can get things like vouchers and stuff there.
Okay, and so we do have a question, and it is, which of these short-term annual goals, because you have the short-term annual goals on this table of contents, which of these short-term annual goals do your students struggle the most with understanding?
Yeah, so I guess the way that I have it listed, I'm not actually calling those in particular short-term annual goals. The way that I talk about it is in each of those, what are your long-term goals and your short-term goals and your immediate goals? So a long-term goal for transportation might be able, to have a brand new car. A short-term goal might just have a reliable car. An immediate goal might be able to get a bus voucher. So each of those has different sort of levels depending on the time. But transportation and housing, if they don't have somewhere to go with their family, then housing is probably the most difficult issue. There are a lot of places who are much more likely to hire people with felonies these days, especially in the last 10 years. But landlords and apartment complexes and places like that, they're not as willing to take the risk of hiring someone with a felony, either because they already have a policy established by like a third party management company, or even if it's the owner of the complex. I've actually encountered this. Even if it's the owner of the complex who doesn't necessarily have anything established in policy, they won't take the risk because they don't want to get sued if something happens. Texas has actually done some things in terms of legislation to encourage landlords to be more open to people with felony convictions. But housing is more difficult than jobs, in my opinion. As far as the students themselves was the direct question. Students themselves having a hard time. Conceptually, it might be things like self-care and reestablishing relationships with family and friends. That's not as straightforward as what you need to do in a job interview, or what the steps you need to take to get your license back. Reestablishing relationships with friends and family, managing the dynamics in the neighborhood you may have used to live in. Those are all a bit more difficult to work through.
Okay, well, thank you, Brandon. Now, so the question was posted here. We would love a copy of the reentry plan booklet and the pamphlets. Would that be something that y'all would be willing to share?
Not yet. We just got them done last week, and I've been in conversation with them about how we're going to go about, because other groups and organizations have asked for that yet. So we're talking about how we're going to do that. So it's still too fresh, so not yet.
Okay, so you'll keep us posted then?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So very good. Thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing all this information. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Great job, great information. And Brandon, do you have your email address anywhere that you were going to share?
Yeah, B Warren, BWARREN at Lee, LEE.edu. B Warren at lee.edu.
Thank you, Brandon. That was an awesome presentation. I greatly appreciate it. No, I just wanted to add an additional resource if folks are just looking at other resources as well. Travis County has some great resources about Ban the Box and Second Chance Employer Acts as well. So there's just a resource guide if you're just trying to look at what's going on other places across the state. Brandon provided some excellent resources, a lot of resources that you guys can utilize if you're wanting to get yourself familiar with, just some of the things that are going on. And I greatly appreciate all that you do, Brandon. Brandon, I wish there was 1,000 more of you out there to assist and, kind of pass the torch. So great job.
And if you're interested in Ban the Box issues, you can contact me about that. I was actually supposed to be in a meeting about organizing legislation toward that end. So you can email me about that too.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for your help. Thank you, Veronica, for being here. And Brandon, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end the session, but I will be in touch, Brandon. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.